Welcome. Welcome to this afternoon's session where we are going to continue the debate on how we might promote healthier cities. My name's Sarah Ayres and I'm Professor of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Bristol. I'm also one of the researchers on the TRUDE project, tackling root causes upstream of unhealthy urban development. TRUDE has been involved in organising the sessions for today in partnership with Bristol's Festival for the Future City. The panel is titled Long Term Health in Lean Times: What Can Cities Do for Themselves? And the context of the debate is that the UK remains a highly centralised system of governance, despite recent attempts to try and devolve power and authority from Whitehall and Westminster to different localities, whether that be the combined authority level, like Greater Manchester, or the city level, like Bristol. So recent devolution has presented some opportunities for place-based leadership and developing local solutions to policy problems, but key questions remain about what cities can really do for themselves without the control or interference for central government. So that's the context within which this panel will operate, and I'm looking forward to a lively debate. We have a distinguished panel with us this afternoon. We are still waiting for one speaker to come online, but let me please introduce the rest. Speakers, as I come to your name, please put a hand up so our audience can identify you. First, Professor Kate Ardern, Director of Public Health for Wigan Council. Kate also wears a number of health-related hats, including leading roles within the Greater Manchester Combined Authority for Health Protection and Emergency Planning. Julia Goldsworthy joins us today in her capacity as Chair of our external advisory board on the TRUDE project. So that board brings together a range of stakeholders. They provide a reality check on the work that we're doing in TRUDE. Julia has also been a member for Parliament for Falmouth and Camborne and has held a number of senior roles in governance and public health. Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. I've been listening to Matthew on the national media this week, talking about the government's response to the COVID crisis. And like all our speakers, Matthew has held a number of distinguished roles, including in the Royal Society of Arts and Institute for Public Policy Research, two organisations, in my view, who have been really excellent in leading the public debate around spatial and social justice. So the format for this panel is as follows. Each speaker will have 7 minutes to introduce their views on the topic. We will then go to the floor, the audience, for questions and answers. We're really keen to hear from you. Please put your comments in the chat in the right-hand bottom corner of your screen. We will pick them up. You can also vote on questions that have already been posted, and I will be persuaded by voting numbers. So if you like the look of a question that's already there, please make your views known and I will come to you. Just to say that we are waiting for another speaker to come online. When they do, I'll wait for a natural pause in the debate and I will introduce them. And this session will finish at 2 o'clock. So panelists, get ready. Audience is prick up. And with all that said, let's start the discussion. Kate Ardern, if I might come to you first, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm speaking to you from sunny Liverpool as opposed to my workplace of Wigan. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Wigan's journey and how you actually transform a place almost against all the odds, particularly against the odds of austerity and then of COVID. For those of you who are not aware of Wigan, it's a borough of 325,000 population, which means although it's technically a town, it's actually bigger than quite a few cities in the UK. So it's the second biggest borough in Greater Manchester. and it has a predominantly white working class population. It was obviously historically part of the Lancashire coalfield, and you will all, of course, be, I'm sure, familiar with George Orwell's famous The Road to Wigan Pier, although don't expect it to be Brighton Pier. It's a jetty on the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. We have a very proud association with Orwell these days, although when I went to Wigan just over a decade ago, if you mentioned Orwell, you got some very dark looks and said, we don't like him, he did us down. And I think it's a measure of the confidence and I think vibrancy of the borough and the way in which it's developed over the last 10 or so years, that view of Orwell has transformed. He's part of our heritage and we're very proud of that historical connection, but he doesn't define who we are now, and he certainly doesn't define our future. So I think, you know, that I'm quoting from a number of citizens who've said that to me. I think the Wigan's journey really starts with a very profound response to austerity in 2010, when we had to save £150 million over a few years. So it was a very rapid, if you like, change in the council's sort of financial picture. Now you can do one of two things. You can either do the classic, you know, salami slicing, in which case all the prevention goes, doesn't it? And you go up to sort of putting in more and more barriers to care. We had a profound philosophical change, both, I think, in terms of the way in which elected members thought, but also the way in which us chief officers supported elected members. And we decided to go down a very different route, which was about public service transformation. This was about nurturing the relationship between citizen and state and harnessing the powers in the community. You know, it was a very traditional paternalistic borough when I first went there in 2008. And that has changed because I think the view was we were disabling people instead of enabling and empowering people. So it was actually about all of us in it together to actually try and make better use of our resources, but underpinned by a single unifying philosophy, which is optimistic, simple, and applies across the place, and very importantly, recognises the physical and social geography of a place. And that's been even more apparent through the pandemic, in actual fact, that social geography and who we connect with. And Wigan tends to connect with the other rugby league boroughs, Warrington, Chorley, St Helens, rather than, say, the east side of Greater Manchester, even though it's the second biggest borough in the Greater Manchester conurbation. So in 2010, the deal evolved. And what's at the heart of that is a very strong narrative. Too often we define communities and places through statistics and numbers, and we lose the humanity of the place. What we have done is really put that strong narrative back in and enabled people to tell their story. And I'll give you a personal example. I don't produce traditional public health annual reports, and I haven't done for some time. What I do is produce community movies. So it's a co-production between myself, I set the theme, but citizens actually tell their story and tell me what to recommend, which is much more that collaborative servant leadership approach. So leadership for us is at every level, and it's about us nurturing, and it's about experts like me being experts on tap as opposed to experts on top. And of course, culture change. We talk a lot about culture change and behaviour change. And often that's about professionals saying, you, the public, must change. Well, actually, we know in our borough that the change has to be modelled by us. So change begins with us as a council, with us as a workforce. So we have we worked with an anthropologist, Robin Faro, to develop deal training, which was based on assets and strength-based conversations, recognising that people have power, they have experience, and they have talents. And our job is to actually bring forth that potential, not to squash it. So a very different approach to the way the workforce has been trained. And we now recruit our staff for 4 principles: be courageous, be positive, be accountable, and be kind. And the be kind bit has been particularly important through pandemic. We've backed that by asset transfer and actually investing in our communities. So just over £11 million invested in community ideas. And from the sort of 75 big ideas that have come forward from the community that we've invested in over the last few years, £12 million in social and economic benefit, and a further £6 million brought in leverage from external funding. So really important to set a culture, to really use your communications, and to really have constant communication and dialogue with the community. So we have a green sofa. We go out and talk to people all over the borough with no preset agenda and listen to what they say. And they help us as a council to define our priorities, which has led over the years to a much more confident and self-reliant community. I think that's been absolutely evidenced by the independent report the King's Fund did into the Wigan deal, which is available on their website, which shows a real significant change in things like healthy life expectancy, which has bucked the England trend. What we have done now through COVID, pivoting our way in which we operate as a borough, we operate on a twin neighbourhood approach. All of the public service, including the NHS, our PCN geography matches our traditional borough geography that the public recognise. We have 14 proud towns. They tend to buddy up as twin towns. Some of them date back to the Domesday Book. So organisational geography matches what the geography that the public recognise, and that's been really important. Our anchor institutions are our GPs, our schools, and we have anchor communities as well. So very much that grassroots approach. And that's really focusing us on community wealth and health building. So if I'm going to sort of end, Sarah, with just a few observations, the coalition of the willing is very important. Telling the story of place, infecting, Matthew, the NHS with wellness, so it's actually focusing on the well-being rather than just treating the disease bit. Very much around whole societal, whole system approaches to prevention and well-being, and that concept of a citizen-led approach. And that's particularly, I think, the approach I take to public health. Thank you,
Kate. Thank you, Kate, very much. And I think this is an opportunity to welcome our fourth speaker, Roxana Fayaz. Hello, Mayor of Newham in London. If I might just introduce you quickly, Roxana. So Roxana's led a series of projects for local authorities, the European Commission, and various charities looking at issues of citizenship and inclusivity. Roxana, would you like to share your thoughts in 7 minutes? And I will give you, with your permission, a 1 minute and a stop warning. We have a sound issue. If it can't be resolved, we might go to another speaker and then come back to you, Roxana. Would you like us to do that? Okay, in that case, Julia, over to you, please.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So Julia Goldsworthy, as Sarah very kindly introduced me, so I'm the chair of the TRUDE External Advisory Board, and most recently I've been working in the West Midlands Combined Authority, not actually in a public health role, as the Director of Economy and Strategy. So the perspective from which I'll be coming in my remarks today is really just about what are the lessons that we can learn for the wider kind of policy and place system, and kind of what is the place of public health and all of that. But really just to start with the work of TRUDE, it's been really, really interesting for me to be able to chair the External Advisory Board, and for me some really important lessons on not just what cities can do to improve health outcomes, but the importance of how they do it as well, and how they take control. So Sarah's already talked about it, but at kind of a very, very high level, the aim of the work is to look at how health outcomes and non-communicable diseases can be prevented by kind of changing how decisions are made about, you know, how our urban landscape is built. So it's kind of looking at the physical landscape as much as anything else. And I think that's particularly important where it's very, very difficult to, you know, you've got that disconnect, haven't you, between outcomes and kind of longer term infrastructure. So what that work is doing is it's building the evidence base, it's identifying interventions, helping us understand their effectiveness, and so we can spread best practice. It's fascinating because it is truly interdisciplinary, and you particularly see that not just through the projects itself, but through the advisory board. And Kate, to your point, actually the role of the communities, the people who are going to be directly affected and impacted and benefit from these interventions, their voice has to be front and centre. And I think it just means that we can be really practical at like how do real world systems fit together. It's not just about public sector interventions, but how the private sector makes decisions as well. And then some really interesting work looking at how we value those actions. So not just about, so I suppose cuts both ways. How do we go beyond an economic kind of understanding of what is valuable to our communities, but equally you know, there is an economic value to public health interventions as well, and how can we better quantify that to help improve decision making? So it's really, really interesting work. It's been really, really fascinating. And from my point of view, these are lessons that we absolutely can apply to broader questions about the role of cities, how they step up, the role they can deliver on levelling up. And for me, public health is important not just in its own right, but the way in which it can provide a point of entry into a much broader debate. And I think that's particularly true of levelling up. And I really hope, as we look to the spending review next week, that when government talks about levelling up, they're not just talking about physical infrastructure. Actually, they're talking about wider outcomes, public services reforms, all of the things that are actually going to make people better able to kind of contribute and participate and improve their well-being. So for me, that's what's really interesting. And I think, you know, it's a space that helps make the case really powerfully for early intervention, really powerfully for place-based approaches, thinking about how we kind of break down the barriers between different silos of activities and different sectors. And you know, public health interventions can so often be a point of entry into wider agendas. So, you know, it's not just about improving well-being. It's, you know, like lots of crime can be solved by starting with a public health kind of approach to start with. So for me, it's kind of making sure that we use it properly as a point of entry into all of those much broader systems. So thinking about all of that, what does that mean for how places approach this agenda? What are the things that they should be focusing on? And a lot really there that I would like to echo Kate in terms of the importance in investing in collaboration. And I think that has been particularly difficult through, you know, in a world where kind of a lot of public sector institutions based in place have really been tested by austerity. So it's an easy thing to disinvest in, but it's really important that it is resourced properly if it's going to work effectively. And I would point to the Bristol City Board as a really good example of that, kind of investing in collaboration, supporting kind of independent collaborative spaces that can show real systems leadership. There's a piece there about working with anchor institutions as well. So again, just plugging the work of Trude, you know, so that our universities are part of that mix in the research base. I think it's kind of staying true in terms of when thinking about levelling up, not just thinking about narrow budgets, but thinking about the whole quantum of resource in a place across the public and private sector, not drinking the Kool-Aid that this can all be reduced down, you know, by government to a series of quite small scale, very targeted competitive funds. You know, like what should be on the table is all of the resource in a place to tackle some of these agendas. And I suppose just going back to my earlier point is like making sure that that kind of public health doesn't end up in this hermetically sealed box. We're really thinking about how it can push innovation on a much broader public services agenda. And then just finally, you know, the citizen voice absolutely has to be at the heart of all of this. And I think cities play a really important role as being kind of guardians of that voice too. And then from a government point of view, I suppose mirroring the priority that places have to attach to investing in collaboration, they have to invest in providing the space and structures for place-based approaches. I've certainly been struck having sat on both sides of the fence, working in the Treasury as a special advisor, but also kind of sitting in the region, our kind of fiscal events, our departmental structures are not designed to bring together that holistic place-based approach. For me, a test of the spending review next week will be kind of whether that is addressed. I'm not desperately filled with confidence, but it's not actually even a question of power. It's like, where is the forum to discuss what places need, and then what mechanisms, levers can be pulled to support them. Some of them might be about devolved power, some of them might be about specific departmental budgets, but there's no opportunity to understand even what the sum of the parts is, let alone to understand how you deliver more than that. I think a big challenge around how do you create the headroom for innovation. I think there has been a real challenge, particularly for local government, where just all of the pull factors, the resources are about focusing on key statutory services. Where is the opportunity to innovate, to double fund, to think about early intervention? There isn't the space for that. So I think that's a challenge for government. And then I do think a final challenge is, how do we make sure that we are valuing the benefits properly? And whilst we have seen some kind of welcome movement around the Green Book, for example, in terms of trying to take a bit of a richer definition about kind of what the benefits are of hard infrastructure investments, we're nowhere near that agenda in terms of investment in innovation in public services. I think the default traditional Treasury view is that that's just revenue, it's money down the drain. You can't properly value kind of savings that will upstream savings. So we just absolutely need more work to do that. And that's why I just want to give a particular shout out to a really interesting report from the IPPR yesterday, actually seeking to look at that and really making the case for saying, what more can we do to move to a kind of New Zealand model where we have a much richer definition of what we value in society. So I think there's tons of, this is difficult stuff, but it's absolutely doable. And those are the kind of things that I would really hope that we just need to be pushing government to step up to.
Thank you, Julia. Excellent. Roxana, are we still sound checking, or are we ready to go?
Hopefully you can hear me now.
We certainly can.
Brilliant.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Partly, I think I'm so used to Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and this is quite an unusual platform for me, so it's taken a while. Look, firstly, can I just convey my thanks and appreciation for the invitation to join you this afternoon to talk about a really important topic. And I'm going to set out, in the first instance, some context to Newham, the place that I represent as the directly elected mayor, and I stepped into office some 3.5 years ago, and how it relates to the questions and the big theme that you're probing and the questions that you're asking during this session. So Newham is the 9th largest local authority in the country. We have a population profile, population of some 357,000 people. We have the largest under 24-year-old cohort anywhere in the country. Some 38% of our resident population is 24 years and younger. In the next 10 to 15 years, we anticipate that a majority of our resident population will be under the age of 24 as opposed to over the age of 24. But we also have high levels of diversity. 78% of our resident population are from ethnic minority communities. We have a location that positions Newham amongst the top 20 most deprived areas, local authorities in the country. And this was very much felt in the context of COVID-19 and how we were very much impacted as a consequence of pre-existing issues of poverty and inequality, and all of those health issues that very much came into sharp focus as a consequence of COVID-19. We have high levels of comorbidity in the form of diabetes, heart disease, obesity. We have amongst the worst air quality profile anywhere in England. A 2019 study by Public Health England showed that we had the worst air quality anywhere in the UK. And we have some 4,500 young people being admitted into hospital with severe respiratory conditions. And most recently, the up-to-date figures point to some 115 people dying prematurely as a consequence of unclean air. We've got several neighbourhoods that exceed the World Health Organization levels in terms of pollutant particulates, and all of that has informed our broad strategic response to how we want to create and develop a place which preceded our response to COVID-19. And I'll start in the pre-COVID-19 position of the interventions that we've been pursuing, grounded and anchored very much along the principles of community wealth building and a very clear definition of what inclusive growth meant for us here in the borough, where so many people are very much living on the edge of the poverty line, or certainly exposed to high levels of insecurity because of the nature of the local economy and the insecure work that results in. Some 68% of our resident population live in the private rented sector. If you take into account household rents, technically a majority of our residents are defined as living in poverty. We have the highest number of households living in temporary accommodation, higher than the entire north of England combined, comprising of, as I said, 5,500 households, but also made up of 7,500 children. We have a housing waiting list, very much demonstrating that Newham's at the forefront of the housing crisis in the capital, some 27,000 people on our housing waiting lists, and there is no way that we're going to be able to offer any of those residents, or all of those residents, should I say rather, a house in the course of my first 4-year term. What we have been doing as a consequence of our community wealth building principles is very much developing a series of strategies and interventions that have at its heart a very definitive anti-poverty approach, but also in the context of poverty and its causality in a whole range of social determinants of ill health, a series of strategies that also addresses the enduring inequalities that impact particular ethnic minority groups that exist in Newham. We've done analysis which shows that up to 36,000 of our residents are not being paid the legally required living wage, national living wage, minimum wage, should I say, let alone the London living wage, despite our aspirations and our ambition to become an accredited London Living Wage Council, which we now have become. What that means for us is that across both the social, economic and health requirements of our residents, everything that the council does has been very much about addressing the social determinants of ill health. So that means fundamentally addressing issues of poverty, bad housing, lack of access to the labour market, including addressing some of the systemic and structural issues of racism that exist within the labour market and as it affects our population. COVID-19 really brought all of those issues into sharp focus. We were at one point during the first wave of the pandemic, the number one local authority in the country where we had the highest levels of mortality as a consequence of deprivation that pre-existed COVID-19. That has very much underpinned our recovery strategy, which we published last July under the auspices of Towards a Better Newham, which represents 8 strategic missions, in part linked to Pan-London missions of recovery that the Mayor of London has outlined over recent months in collaboration with London councils and borough leaders, including here in Newham. And our principal mission as a local authority in the context of COVID-19 recovery, notwithstanding the ongoing challenges of living with COVID-19 and the emerging crisis that faces us right now with regards to the winter plans that the government isn't willing to initiate in terms of Plan B. We have made the health, well-being and happiness of our residents our primary measure of economic success. We've also driven, as part of our recovery mission, the importance of using our approach to the spatial and our vision of place to incubate the idea of 15-minute neighbourhoods where your basic essentials, be that shopping, household items, but also access to health, are within a 15-minute walk or cycle from where you live. All of that is being marshalled under the auspices of the review of our local plan that is currently underway, and it's absolutely fundamental that we ensure that our residents are very much at the heart of those conversations across all of these important strategic interventions. And we've been doing that through a major plank that underpins my administration, which is around participatory democracy. We've become the first local authority in the country that has established a permanent citizen assembly, and we've recently concluded one cycle involving some 50 residents that were chosen through sortition method, which is essentially random sampling, to consider how best we can enhance the greening of our borough as a place. In sum, there's a huge amount that we had initiated in advance of COVID-19 and a huge more series of interventions, including our 50 Steps to a Healthier Newham, that we have initiated and accelerated as a consequence of what we faced through the COVID-19 pandemic, which we are marshalling forward with and in collaboration with our residents, making sure that their voices and their ideas and their participation in the decisions that we make are very much at the heart of our vision and ambition for the borough as we recover and come through COVID-19. I'll conclude there, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Matthew, over to you. Matthew Taylor.
Thank you. I'm kind of aware of the time and making sure that there's an opportunity for us to have a discussion. So I'll be brief. I want first to just talk about the opportunity that we may have. And this has been referred to already, part of this, which is for health to be part of the story of Levelling Up. And I don't need to add, I don't think the comments that were already being made about that. And what will be interesting will be whether, when we hear more about Levelling Up, whether that's the case. I sat on the government's Industrial Strategy Council. It was chaired by Andy Haldane, and Andy's now gone in as a kind of temporary permanent secretary in the Cabinet Office to oversee the work on Levelling Up. And what will be interesting will be whether Andy's work matches up to of the Industrial Strategy Commission, which was on the one hand to recognise in a very good report that it did on Levelling Up, that Levelling Up takes a lot of devolvement. It requires devolution of a lot of power, the investment of a lot of money, and patience, because it will take decades. Now, that's not really the kind of realistic, full-blown account that one's hearing at the moment. So let's watch that space. But the other argument we used to have on the Industrial Strategy Council was whether or not industrial strategy should just be concerned with high-value, high-export areas of the economy, or ought to also be focused on the foundational economy. And I think, broadly speaking, those of us who advocated the latter position were winning out on that. So we need to watch carefully what's happening in Levelling Up, and we need to do everything we can to be trying to influence that so that it is an approach which is coherent and robust. And if it were to be so, it would have to include a strong focus on the importance of health in its many dimensions. The other opportunity, of course, is the move to integrated care systems within the health service, and the explicit idea that those integrated care systems should focus on population health, health inequalities, health outcomes. So, one of the challenges for the health service, really almost from the very beginning, has been that the health service is a service which meets demand, not need, and need and demand are not the same thing, which is part of the problem of health inequalities. And of course, a lot of that was brought home to us during COVID. But at least in the integrated care systems, we have major bodies in the health service with an explicit requirement to focus not just on the medical model and the response to demand, but on addressing population health outcomes. And again, there is an opportunity at local level where there are local leaders so minded to really collaborate richly to shift the agenda in that area. I just want to identify 3 things that I think are potential barriers to this agenda. The attempt, which we all acknowledge, to have a more integrated and holistic view of health as part of urban flourishing, and also of urban flourishing as part of our strategy for health. So I think the 3 things I think we need to work on are, first of all, the quality of research. So I think we say a lot about the economic significance of health investment and the health significance of social investment. We tend to do it at quite a high level of generality, and we tend often to ignore some of the difficult issues here. I mean, let me say something which, please don't quote this out of context, it'll sound brutal, but for a 75-year-old person to drop dead of a heart attack is a result for the taxpayer. So, when we think about the relationship between economic factors, public spending, investment, externalities in relation to health and the wider economy, I think we need to get quite specific, because yes, there are multiple links and we can list them. We can talk about the number of people who could be in employment if their health needs were being better addressed, or if they're getting more support in their role as carers. We can talk about the importance of procurement. We can talk about anchor institutions. We can talk about capital investment. We can talk about R&D. And we need to distinguish between short-term linkages and longer-term linkages. So again, going back to the point that I just made, if the only people the health service spent money on were people of working age, I think it would be much easier to make this argument. But as we all know, the group that by far and away leads to the largest part of healthcare expenditure are older people who are they're not economically active. And so the argument there that investment is good for the economy is going to be pretty tenuous, and we're going to need to make a longer term argument, which is about the need to invest in order that more people live longer and healthier lives. But that's a very different kind of argument, and also a much more difficult one to make because of the length of time between the investment and the outcome. So the first point is we need better, more granular, more robust research. And I would just say to you, as someone who's been in policy research all my life, I'm afraid it is the case that arguments along the lines of, well, investment here has this great externality, tend to be, the quality of those arguments is rarely very strong, and even less likely to be influencing people who work in the Treasury. So that's the first challenge. The second one is an institutional challenge, which is the work around kind of public health in broad terms is complicated. We have 2 new national public health bodies, which seem to me to have rather overlapping remits. We have integrated care systems, which are themselves working not just at system level, but at place level with health and well-being, partnerships, public health. I actually organised the first meeting of what I hope will become a forum last week of people from the public health community, the Royal College of Public Health, the Association of Directors of Public Health, with NHS people thinking about population health and health inequalities. And to be honest, there was quite a lot of, how can I put this? There was quite a lot of pain in the room that we had to kind of surface and start to get through, particularly understandably from directors of public health who felt that they have been arguing for many, many years for a public health perspective. And now suddenly the NHS, which has failed to achieve a leftward shift out of acute into primary and community, which has stuck to a medical model, which is where acute sector has continued to gobble up most of the money, is now suddenly talking about population health and health inequalities in public health. So getting the institutional framework to work nationally and locally, and getting people who broadly share the same commitments and perspectives to work with each other is going to be a challenge, because it is quite a fragmented and slightly kind of fractious context at the moment. And then the final point I want to make is just a kind of political one, which is that if we're going to talk about health in a holistic terms at city level, we're going to need to recognize that that conversation about health is not a public sector only conversation, nor is it only a public sector voluntary sector organisation, but it is also one that's going to need to involve the private sector, not just because GPs are private contractors, most of them, not just that lots of care is provided through the private sector, but we have a pharmaceutical sector as well. And I think that sometimes on the left in particular, there's a kind of sense of, well, you can't talk about health and have any kind of engagement from private sector people because, they're not to be trusted in any way. And, the whole point about health is we must defend the public sector monopoly. But if you define health in broader terms and you start to think about the role of health in economic productivity, health in the workplace, and health in terms of the economy, R&D and all of that, you're going to need that to be a conversation which involves all sectors of the economy. And again, I'm not sure in many places we're having that kind of fully inclusive conversation. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I think at this point we're going to go to questions from the floor. I'd like to get as many of these in as possible. So panel, can I urge you to respond in pithy sound bites as best you can? As promised, I'm persuaded by the number of votes per question. So I'd like to start with you, Kate, but come to the question, what is the one key thing that needs to happen to incorporate health into mainstream policy at city level? Over to you, Kate.
Relationships, trust, and having translating health into the language of plain English instead of using technical jargon.
Thank you. Roxana.
Actually, I just wanted to pick up on the point that Matthew raised about the importance of the conversations around health outcomes of resident populations not being an isolated one within policy circles or indeed within the public sector. And just by way of illustration, in the Newham context, there's absolutely a mobilisation in collaboration with the private sector as part of a broader strategic buy-in across both private and public sector around the inclusive economy agenda that we're driving, and they get it both for its innate social value and the moral necessity of it, but also because it's sound business. And actually, as someone stepping into office 3.5 years ago, I've been pleasantly surprised, at times shocked, at the eagerness to which commercial partners investing huge amount of monies want to be part of the solution of addressing some of the most enduring social issues that our local communities are facing, be it unemployment, be it low wages. The number of anchor institutions that are signing up to the London Living Wage Pledge, or being accredited our community wealth building status, has been phenomenal. And actually, I think that points to something very encouraging. And also, for me, illustrates the importance of having, yes, bold vision, but being able to persuade both private and public sector partners to buy into it, because there's both the moral, social, economic and business justification and case for it.
Thank you. I mean, this is a moot conversation. The panel that we have to finish the stream of sessions after is about private sector involvement. So this is going to be a debate that will be picked up after this session. Julia, might I come to you? But the reminder of the question that it's about what's the one key thing that needs to happen to incorporate health into mainstream policy at city level?
Thanks. I think it's, in the same vein as Kate, really, that just don't underestimate the power of those relationships and don't make the mistake of thinking that you can solve this structurally. I mean, Matthew is absolutely right that it's a very fragmented and fractious environment. But just bringing it all together won't necessarily address the fractiousness. So I think it comes back to investing in those relationships. And as Roxana said, kind of recognizing that the private sector will have a broader range of motivations. Absolutely, it will be about the bottom line, but though the private sector can be as invested in place as the public sector institutions as well. And just absolutely, you mustn't forget that. They are. Whether it's universities, whether it's businesses, they are rooted in place, and they know that their outcomes are as tied to the place as it is to their kind of, self-contained business model.
Yeah, look, I think you make a community by building a house, not forming a committee. And so I think that if we're going to get the kind of collaboration people are talking about, it's about developing testable propositions, quite specific testable propositions, and then investing in those in order to be able to demonstrate feedback loops, which give us the confidence to believe that we can do more. So what are those kind of propositions? It might be, well, we are going to increase the employment rate of people who suffer from multiple health conditions by a certain percentage, and we're going to, work over 3 years to do that, and we'll be able to measure it, demonstrate it, and also understand some of the economic benefits that are resulted from that. For it to just take, one concrete example. So I think that one of the challenges of ICSs is going to be to get away from a kind of generic notion of collaboration and get into the identification of specific projects with pretty clear objectives, which are business-ready investment propositions. Maybe just public investment, but maybe as others have been saying, across maybe other partners as well. So we've got to kind of demonstrate that we can achieve this feedback loop. And I think at the moment we kind of see it rhetorically, but the evidence that we can achieve it is less clear.
Thank you. A reminder, audience, please continue to put your comments and questions in the chat. I can see there's some questions in the question section coming through. That's great. I'm going to move to the next question with the most votes. And Roxana, I'll come to you first, if I may. Has COVID changed the narrative around tackling health outcomes locally?
It has, in so much as it's been overlaid, or rather actually anchored in the need for us to, in a collaborative and collective way, because this is not just the preserve of either the local authority, the public health team, or the health partnership infrastructure in place. It actually needs to have that ongoing conversation, engagement and dialogue with residents and people. And in that sense, it certainly has in my local context. One of the things that we recognised very early on was the scale of the challenge in response to lockdown and the requirements around either food distribution, supporting residents that were deemed clinically vulnerable or extremely clinically vulnerable, helping them through their periods of needing to isolate. The council, along with health partners, local health partners, just couldn't do it alone. We needed to leverage the power and the potency of the mobilisation of the wider community through that mutual aid effort that manifested in so many different places. So it certainly has led to a continuation of that collaborative effort and an understanding and recognition that it's all of our business, including those voices that aren't ordinarily sitting within the traditional arenas that we're used to. Thank
you, Julia.
Yeah, I think it brought home really powerfully, didn't it? Just the impact of health inequalities and has asked a lot. I think it's made more people ask a lot of questions about just, whether that's fundamentally something that we should be putting up with as a society. I think, as Roxana said, in some of the challenge really brought out the best of our local communities and how kind of the local, public and private, but also civil society, how they could work together and support one another. So at that level, it absolutely brought out the best in people, but also massive tensions and frustrations when you think about the kind of acute response and the relationship between central and local government, and this kind of sense that or I think maybe central government confusing control with agency. So just, the more difficult the pandemic got, the tighter they wanted to grip, and the more difficult it actually became then for them to have agency on the ground. So I think that some of those central local relationships have been really, really tested and damaged. So, as well as that, it bringing out the best and really raising the profile, like particularly as we look to a challenging winter, you do worry that those relationships are going to be tested further. And I think you can't ignore the resources point as well. Partly in the chat, people saying actually you can't ignore the centre because we are a country where so many of the resources are held centrally. And again, I just think some of the decisions that will be made in the spending review, will they recognise kind of where the power to act and be responsive and build communities and work collaboratively, are we going to see structurally resources flowing to help support those groups, which are going to be absolutely so critical to the continuing response?
Matthew.
Yeah, well, I think I worry at the moment that there's some very big lessons which we were talking about some time ago that we're forgetting or that we didn't drive home. Certainly one of those is just around resilience. If you look at it from a health service perspective, COVID hit off the 10 years of the swamp. We had a health service based upon incredibly high bed occupancy levels, on much higher than anywhere else in Europe, for example. People in Europe would consider it kind of crazy that in the middle of the summer we would still be aiming for kind of 90+% bed occupancy. If you have a system like that, COVID comes along, you have to do what we had to do, which is to virtually stop all elective procedures. That didn't happen in many other parts of the world. They did not stop. They don't have enormous waiting lists. They were able to continue with their elective processes because they had enough capital estate and beds to be able to create COVID spaces, non-COVID spaces, or to kind of crank up their activity. So there are some quite important lessons about social resilience and public service resilience, and I worry that we're not really learning those. To be more positive, I think clearly COVID taught us the incredible link between health and the economy, because in the end it was a health condition which nearly closed down our economy. So the very idea of talking about health and economy together, which is something we all do all the time, but other people might not do, was powerfully reinforced. I think secondly, we learned something, of course, we learned about the scale of inequalities, but we also learned something about the fact that that if we don't work very actively, we simply do not reach some of the people that we need to reach. And the vaccination program taught us that. And actually, to be fair, a lot of really powerful learning has taken place around how it is you need to reach out to the communities who, for very understandable reasons, don't have confidence or don't have the same levels of education or have strong reasons not to trust authority. So, there's an important learning there about, I talked about the difference between demand and need. And when it came to the vaccination, we were not satisfied with the people who demanded the vaccine. We were absolutely committed to getting out to the people who needed the vaccine. So we need to apply a similarly kind of proactive view when it comes to other health conditions as well. And then I think the final thing I'd say is, I do think it also tells us something about the importance of being able to connect conversations about science, technology, and innovation with stories around public services and social change. And I think those of us who did social science degrees and are rather distrustful of scientific and technological stories of progress. The fact of the matter is, God knows where we would be without all those clever scientists and their vaccine. On the other hand, we know that, as I said earlier, this is a crisis in many ways steeped in political economy and society, and the way in which it's played out is a reflection of our society. So I think an opportunity for us to try and think about future, holding both the ideas of the potential of scientific and technological progress there, and also thinking about the social and economic context of it.
Kate, please.
Thank you. And I guess a few observations from me. What COVID has taught us is the very excellent local systems were able to pivot at a moment's notice from health improvement and the development of, if you like, integrated services at that neighbourhood level into delivering a health protection response and a humanitarian response at the same time. And our staff could be flexibly redeployed and learn a lot of new skills. And we need to preserve that going forward, because although COVID is the pandemic of the moment, what we mustn't do is lose the opportunity to build back a locally resilient health protection system. And that is very much at the heart of our locality plan as part of the ICS, but also part of the thinking across Greater Manchester. Can't be reliant on UXAR just to do health protection. And the Italians are doing exactly what I'm describing in terms of building that local resilience back from their learning. Secondly, we already were a Marmot borough and certainly a Marmot conurbation. And we commissioned Michael and his team to do a report specifically for Greater Manchester called Building Back Fairer. Now, that is very much at the heart of GM's COVID recovery, but very certainly at the heart of Wigan Borough's COVID recovery. So if anything, what COVID has done has driven us even further and faster in terms of that deal-based response, because we know it has to be the regeneration has to come from the cities and upwards. And I guess when you've got an economy that's predominantly small family SME based, okay, we've got Heinz, the biggest baked bean factory in the world, and we obviously have a thriving public sector, but it's very much those small family businesses. And Matthew's point that we've built fantastic relationships with our businesses. They're already very much at the heart of the well-being agenda anyway. And that is very much going to be part of that's why the community wealth building is very much part of community health building and vice versa. And I guess lastly, Julia, from me, one of the things that is very unique about a USP for Wigan, and I think in a sense each borough has their own USP, is our cultural offer and our investment in culture, arts and heritage, called the Fire Within, is very much at the heart of building confidence and resilience in communities. And that celebration of people's talents is going to be absolutely key going forward. It's not just about the physical regeneration, as Matthew said. It's about that social and building confidence and hope and belief in your communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Given where we are, I'm going to draw this session to an end, but a massive thank you to our panelists for joining us and to our audience who have been contributing in the chat function. I mean, just to say, I'm very professionally enlightened and thankful for the conversation that we've just had, because the Trude project actually does really pick up on lots of the issues that we've discussed today. The importance of setting narratives and visions, creative ways of engaging the public and private sector and the community, thinking about more precise science that can feed into the public debate in creative ways. So, Trude is doing the best job it possibly can to pick up on some of the important elements we've discussed today. Thank you again. It's an opportunity for us all to shake off. There is a final session that begins at 2:45 where the panel will look at the role of the private sector. So please get back for that. And thank you again to everybody. Thank you, Bristol Festival of the Future City. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.